of actions and inactions that we share responsibility for.
Vielen Dank. Now, Madam Cretu.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Commissioner, as you know, the UN report shows that contribution to emergency funds recorded a decrease of 4.8 billion in the amount intended for supporting the regression of humanitarian crisis in the poorest countries. It is the highest historical recorded gap between the needed funds and the funds collected from donor governments, and of course, seeing these figures, we cannot stop thinking that the huge amount of money spent for banks' bailout. Each government is responsible for solving its own country problems, but at the same time it is unfair and indecent to overlook the fact that mainly the developing countries are mostly hit by the economic crisis, although these countries are less responsible for the economic crisis. The world around is teaching us not expecting too much from humanitarian calls, especially during recession periods. Therefore, I would like to draw your attention about the risk of discarding the developing countries under accelerated growing poverty and obtaining a boomerang effect shaped as amplified internal tension, bloody conflicts, humanitarian tragedies and massive migration, yet again debated by developed countries. Considering this condition, I believe that efforts are required on one direction to discharge our responsibilities, and this requires a boosting of international aid, and at the same time a more efficient development aid is required. I also believe we should focus to decrease the dependence on the humanitarian aids for some of the beneficiaries, and I would like also to ask you, Mr. Commissioner, taking into account what former Commissioner Michel said before about the necessity to more involvement of the World Bank and IMF, do you intend to propose something for this Istanbul summit? And I don't want to close this speech without saying my appreciation for your start of mandate of the Commissioner, and I keep in mind the US South Africa summit, your visit in Zimbabwe at the end of this week, the emergency assistance provided in the recent past days for the 100,000 victims of the floods in West Africa. But at the same time, I wish to point out that not only Burkina Faso faces natural disasters, but also Niger, which also needed international support. Not only floods are threatening human lives, but an insidious and permanent threat is represented by drought occurrence too. And I also appreciate that you allocated 53 million last week for the drought response in sub-Saharan countries. I think these are encouraging indicators of dynamism, which I hope will influence the talks in G20 summit in Pittsburgh and Copenhagen conference, as these meetings are critical nowadays when the MDGs goals are under major risk of failure. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Mulțumesc. Nyní přistoupíme k naší proceduře Catch the Eyes. Vidím, že se tady hlásí.
We now move to catch the eye procedure. I see that Ms. Reuter has asked for the floor. You have the floor for 1 minute.
Pane komisaři, chci vyjádřit také své rozčarování.
Thank you very much. I just wanted